Hi friends, welcome to episode 6 of She Got Away, my journey with denial, a self-destructive and gaslighting experience. I'm your host, Kibbi Linga. I can't believe we're on episode 6 already, and I'm still nervous. It's like nerve-wracking to do these episodes, but I love doing them because I've always wanted to share my story and it tremendously helps me heal. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a satanic ritual abuse survivor or ritual abuse survivor, and I've been sharing my story for about 2.5 months. I grew up in a cult. I've escaped it after a lot of hard work, but while growing up, my parents performed these rituals where they would sacrifice children, and then my mom would eat the human flesh, and she would make me eat it too. And when she did, she would look at me to make sure I was chewing it or eating it. So I would chew it up, and then when she wasn't looking, she would turn away. I would quickly spit it out in the most convenient place I could find. And I spit it out because I thought it would make me feel less guilty about eating it, and because it was gross. So, yeah. Anyways, I forgot these horrible memories and my horrendous trauma. I was in denial and forgot about all this for about 15 to 17 years. Some people don't understand how someone can go through a horrific, traumatic childhood and then forget the memories and recover them later, like I have. And honestly, if I wasn't a survivor and I saw a survivor sharing their story like I am, I'd be wondering the same thing. How does somebody experience something so painful and then forget about it for so many years? All I've got is my experience, and I'll share with you my experience with forgetting these horrible memories and being in denial for so many years in a nutshell. Today we're going to talk about how I was brainwashed into denial, how I use self-destructive behaviors or coping mechanisms to stay in denial, and a little bit about my family throughout all of these years. We have some trigger warnings: eating disorders and drug and alcohol abuse. Kibbi Linga is my pseudonym that I use, and if I bring up any past dialogue or conversations, I'm going to replace my real name with Kibbi. I'm 36 years old. I'm telling you this because I'm going to be walking you through years of my life. So I'm 36 right now. Orange is the color that I use for the feeling of shame. I'm wearing an orange shirt today because I feel shameful about the disordered eating that I had during my years of denial. I used it as a coping mechanism to help me stay in denial. It's the number one thing I feel shameful about in my life. I recovered from the disordered eating in 2018. I have a lot of support in real life about it. I haven't shared about it at this level, and as I've been sharing my story, I've been shameful to share it. I don't care anymore if others make fun of me or laugh at me for it. At the end of the day, it doesn't harm me what others think about me. So with that being said, I'm so grateful that I've gained the strength to be able to tell you about my disordered eating today. I appreciate and I love you guys for witnessing and being a part of my speaking out journey. Let's start with age 0 to 6. Those were the strongest years of my life. I had the gift of discernment at a really young age. I don't know how. I was arguing with my mom all the time, saying, "This is wrong, wrong, wrong." And it was known in my family that my mom and I didn't like each other. My older sister was on my mom's side. My younger sister was, for the most part, on mine. I would get in trouble for brainwashing my younger sister. That's when my mom would lock me in a cage in the basement, because during dinner time is when we would all talk. So during evenings is when she would put me in this cage so I wouldn't be brainwashing my sisters. During that time period, ever since I could talk, I stood up for my beliefs 24/7, every chance I could with my mom. She probably didn't think that she would have a child that would be so opposing to her beliefs, but she did. I'm very grateful that I was able to find faith at a very young age because that tremendously helped me get through. I talk about my experience finding faith as a child in the beginning of episode 4. Another thing that helped me get through during my very early years were colors. they would help me have my feelings. I remember waking up before the rest of the family, about 2 hours maybe, enough time to play with colors in my head, and I would compartmentalize colors with emotions and different colors for different personalities or people in my life, and I would play with them in my head and create a design kind of similar to my art to help me express my feelings. In fact, that's how I create or paint today. I still use the same thinking that I used as a child. I loved having my difficult feelings as a child. I didn't think it was fun, but when I had my painful feelings, it always benefited me. It made me feel like things were going to be okay. I always felt better when I had my painful feelings. It was worth it to me to have my feelings. After the rituals, I would spend 2 or 3 days, maybe. I don't know, days though. Just having my feelings, being angry, crying, being upset, blah-de-da. The first part was always I felt like the victim. The second part was I would bring out the colors. Okay, I could do a whole nother episode on feelings. I'm going to stop right now. I loved having feelings as a child. I didn't have a human to go to. I went to our creator or God or whatever our creator's name is, and he was there for me to have my feelings. And that's who I talked to in my head when looking for someone to express myself to. And I knew one day I would leave. I knew it. I didn't know how long it would take. I thought it would take a lot less time, but I absolutely knew that I would leave that family. During my entire childhood, I thought that my family plus the others that they lured into to participate in the rituals were the only people on the planet who sacrificed children and did these things. I specifically remember thinking as a child, why my family? Part of my mom's manipulation was, I'll speak for myself, making me drink the Kool-Aid, or making me do something so bad and that I felt so guilty and shameful about that I would never leave. That was part of her manipulation tactic. When I was almost 6 years old, I experienced the most traumatic and painful night of my life. And hopefully I'll be talking about that on episode 8 because there's importance to the number 8. If I gain the strength to by then, we're already on 6. But I want to make note that the most painful memory of my entire life happened when I was 5, almost 6, and it changed me. So that was me until age 6 in a nutshell. From age 6 to 9, I was basically the same person, but just a little older. As far as my most traumatic event that I experienced at 5, almost 6, I wasn't able to have all of my feelings about that, unfortunately. Not until recovery, and I'm still working through those feelings. And I feel like it did affect me negatively because I wasn't able to have the feelings. They were too much. I think it did affect me negatively, but it took a few years. And I held on for a few years from 6 to 9, and I continued arguing with my mother, saying what she was doing was wrong. My father got cancer when I was 8, and he passed away when I was 9, so the rituals ended up stopping when I was 8 years old. However, while growing up, my mom would always tell me that these rituals would stop when I was around 10 years old so that I would have time to forget them. So I knew that they were going to stop when I was around 10 years old. But my father ended up getting cancer and dying first. For as psycho as my mom is, she was very honest about a few things. And one thing was that she would tell me that these rituals were going to stop when I was around 10 years old so that I would have time to forget. She would tell me that she was going to basically make me forget. She was warning me that she was going to brainwash me. I knew it was coming. I thought I was going to be strong enough to not be convinced. Based off of my observations of my father always picking up the children and discarding of them, I believe that my mother needed my father to do the rituals. She didn't want to go out there and risk it, right? She didn't want to go do those things. Those things are risky. In fact, I think that's why she married my dad, so that he could do those things. Around the age of 9, my mom took us from private school and moved us to public school and said we're no longer religious, we're now spiritual. After all that, when the rituals stopped, basically, or around that time, is when she said, we're no longer religious, we're now spiritual. That was so confusing. Very confusing. And to me, in my head, I'm like, oh, great, we're not religious anymore? Okay, maybe I can, forget that then, because now we're spiritual. So I feel like it could have even been a way to brainwash us. I don't know, but I do remember going from being religious to spiritual and thinking okay, well then maybe I can just shrug off what happened a little bit because we're spiritual now. I don't know. I mean, I went from being extremely religiously abused to spiritual overnight. It was kind of like a dream come true. It was oh, thank God she's not pulling this religious abuse anymore. What my mom meant by becoming spiritual, I have no idea. I think it was probably just another front. So at age 8, the rituals stopped, and around the same time, we just stopped going to church, too. To wrap up age 6, 7, and 8, I do remember there were times, probably 5 or less, that I had feelings that were good about my mom. I remember looking at her one day and feeling love and care for her and hoping that nothing bad would ever happen to her. And I genuinely felt it. I can feel it as I share it right now. But then it wouldn't take me long to snap out of those feelings and remember, hey, Kibbi, she does evil things. And those were my first memories of moments of denial, are those memories, 6, 7, and 8, that I, cared about her and thought I loved her, but they didn't last for a long time. And with denial, in my experience, it doesn't happen overnight. And I think those were the beginning signs that I was falling into denial. Although I still consider myself very strong from age 6, 7, and 8, even 9, I had those moments. The good feelings for her didn't last long, a couple hours at best. I don't know why I could look at her and think anything positive. I don't know. I can tell you how I was brainwashed, but I don't know. I do feel that I just wanted a mother. Let's talk about age 9. This is kind of a big year for me. This is the year my father died, which also brought me a lot of confusion because he was a big answer to what happened, but he died. He left. And I'm stuck with my mom at this point. My father dying just added to the confusion. I was in swim club at the time. My mom had us doing many extracurricular activities after the rituals stopped. I think it was to help distract us. It distracted me. And also, when my dad died, my mom took us to a grief support group for kids who lose their parents or something like that. And I thought, it was just so confusing, right? It's my entire life, I never saw her once care about my father. But then when he dies, she signs us up for a support group. It was confusing. Did she care? Or was she just trying to look good on the outside? And at the same time, she started a new round of brainwashing, the one that got me. And that was that it never happened. When I would argue with her about the rituals, instead of her saying, this is this is the right thing to do, or whatever argument she had, she would now say, no, Kibbi, they never happened. You're crazy. You're the problem. I was constantly trying to talk about the rituals that happened, and she was like, you're crazy. They didn't happen. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about, Kibbi. And she would put her hands just like that. She would even tell me that she thought she dropped me on the ground when I was a baby, and that's why I thought these things. My very first coping mechanism that was like very effective and strong and like instantly took away my feelings and made life feel like it was okay, and it in a way exempt me from having my feelings. And that's the thing with these coping mechanisms. They shoved my feelings down, and when I didn't have my feelings, when I don't have my feelings, I progress into denial. And so when I stopped having my feelings, ever since childhood, as I said, I loved having feelings as a child. When I picked up these coping mechanisms and started shoving my feelings down, it just progressed me into denial more and more and more and more. And it went on for years and years and years and years. These coping mechanisms that I speak of masked the truth. So the first strong coping mechanism that I found worked for me was actually Pepsi. I don't know what it is about Pepsi. I was like 10, 11 years old. I would drink an enormous amount. I would go and get like a 6-pack from the store and drink the whole thing. I don't know if it was the sugar, the fizz, the caffeine, certain chemicals they put into it, but it just helped me feel like my life was going to be okay and like I didn't have to have my feelings. Before we get into the disordered eating, I had a few issues with food. Not just the disordered eating, which I'll talk about in a second, but also I had problems with controlling my food, my caloric intake, my weight, and that was a result of my mother growing up. Anytime I would grab seconds at mealtime, she would shame me. Like, do you really need to eat that, Kibbi? Is that really necessary? If you eat too much, you're going to gain weight. Or if I'd like ask her for money for a snack at a vending machine, she would like shame me for 10 minutes, but I was really hungry, so I wanted the money, and then finally she would give it to me, and I would go to the vending machine because I was hungry, feeling shameful about it. So that and a bunch more that she would say to me about her fear of me becoming overweight, like triggered me to have control issues with food and weight. And as a result, for 20 years, I did extreme dieting, tried to control my weight, my caloric intake. So that's one issue I developed with food, but also not the main issue. So anyways, at age 10-ish or 11, I began the disordered eating. So let's go back to the most traumatic event I was talking about, where I feel like it was when I drank the Kool-Aid, or maybe I just took sips. I don't even know if I drank it. But what ended up happening that made me feel extremely shameful and guilty is that I was forced to eat a victim named Sam. And it wasn't my first time eating the human flesh. Actually, every time I was forced to eat the flesh, I chewed it up and I spit it out, whether it be in my milk glass, if I was at the dinner table, or underneath the blanket, if I was in the cage. And when I was forced to eat Sam, when I was 5, almost 6, I, again, chewed it up and spit it out. So when I was 10 or 11, I was thinking of ways to enjoy food, because I was a compulsive eater too, and when I ate food, that helped me not have my feelings too. So I wanted to enjoy food, but not gain weight from it. So I thought of chewing up food and spitting it out. And I thought it was a good idea, and before I even did it, I brought it up at the dinner table and I said, "Hey, Mom, I thought of this idea. What if I just chew up food and spit it out?" And her reaction was very simple. It was, "Well, I don't think you would get much pleasure from that." That was it. And I sat on it for a little bit, and then I started chewing up food and spitting it out. I can't believe I just admitted to chewing up and spitting out food publicly, something I've been very shameful about for over 20 years. And if anyone wants to make fun of me, which they probably will, I don't care, because I'm the one over here being brave, talking about my trauma, my shame, and as a result, I heal. I've been doing it for 5 years with my art, now with words. When I talk about this, I heal. And I'm very grateful for that. So thank you for listening. The idea of chewing up food and spitting it out was influenced by my past. When I chewed up the flesh and I spit it out, it took away a lot of my guilt, I believe, even though I still had a lot of guilt from even just spitting it out. When I was chewing up and spitting out food, I thought it was a way to control my weight and still enjoy food. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. But when I started doing that, I noticed something. I noticed that it made me feel so shameful and guilty, and it was my little secret, and it put me into denial, I feel, about when I ate or was forced to eat Sam, because every time I would chew up food and spit it out, I was shameful about that, and then I would forget my shame about Sam. Chewing up and spitting out food surely was a big contributor to me forgetting about the past and going into denial. You'll see that I carried the behaviors on over the years, and I'm sorry I forgot about Sam. I was never meant to forget about Sam. I promised myself I wouldn't, and I don't know what happened. I think life just got too painful, and I started telling myself things like, I'll worry about this later when I'm older, and yeah. So age 10 to 11, I start with my main coping mechanism, the disordered eating. And also, when I was 11, I started playing competitive volleyball. Just another distraction. I didn't even like volleyball. I liked basketball, but I played competitively. I played so many different sports, extracurricular activities. After the age of 8, my mom put us all into these extracurricular activities, these sports, and she made herself look good too. Girl Scout leader, stuff like that. So at this time, 10, 11, 12, 13, I'm in a whole bunch of things. Soccer, volleyball, basketball, baton. I could go on and on. It was like such a distraction. My whole life was school and extracurricular activities, and we would often travel on the weekends for volleyball. All these activities were a distraction from the truth. Age 13 was a very painful year for me. I started to develop into a woman, and I believe that's the year I got my menstruation. My mom was shaming me for this happening, and I also felt shameful. And there's like this period from age 12, 13, and 14 where it was like she didn't really want much to do with me because I was developing. I felt like she was disgusted by me developing into a woman, and I felt extremely, extremely shameful. The only reason I can think of as in why my mom would treat me like that about becoming a woman and getting my menstruation is because she was obsessed with the youth. She was attracted to the youth. It was a horrible time. She wasn't supportive. She didn't teach me about anything. She shamed me instead. And I also did my first personality switch, or it was when my dissociative identity disorder developed. It was when I was 13. I did what my mom said, and I talk about this in episode 3, which was to take my heart or soul and trade it in for a new one when my emotional pain became too big. And at age 13, I did that. And I switched from Kibbi to Paige, or from one personality to another. When I switched personalities or personas and basically felt like I was on my second life within the same life, it was a coping mechanism, but it also progressed my denial because it was also a way for me to avoid the truth, avoid having my feelings. It was disassociating me from the truth, and all these things add up, and over time, I forget the memories, which is what happened. And at the same time, my mom is telling me I'm crazy and I'm the problem and that none of the rituals ever happened. When I was 14, I started high school. It was difficult. I couldn't figure out why I didn't quite fit in or why I was, had these eating problems or why I was a problem. I was very confused. I was so confused because whenever I would go to my mom and ask her why I was struggling in life, she would say that it was my fault and I was the problem. My older sister would say that too, especially as the years progressed. So by age 13, when I had that horrible year at 13, I would say by then I was for the most part in denial. I do remember a few more arguments with my mom past age 13, but not many. There was this one argument I had with her at age 15 or 16, and I somehow remembered for a period of time, so I go up to her and I'm like, I know what happened, and I was so mad, and I'm like, stop lying to us, I know what happened, stop, and she was just gaslighting me and saying it didn't happen and that I was the problem, and I told her that one day I was going to grow older and I was going to be an artist and I was going to write a book and they were going to make the book into a movie, and that she was going to go see the movie without even reading the description and see her own movie. I remember that argument very well. It was when I was like 15 or 16. So I wasn't fully in denial at 13, but for the most part, I was. There were just a few more arguments of truth after that. Okay, I'm ready to move to age 15. So at 15, I'm, mostly in denial, and I needed more coping mechanisms to stay in denial. My coping mechanisms were self-destructive, as you see. At age 15, I picked up two more. One being compulsive running. I know running sounds healthy, and it is, but I took it to an extreme where it was not, and for many years. When I ran, I felt like I was running away from my family, from the secret, from the truth, from all of my problems, and then the icing on the cake is I would get a runner's high. The running made me feel so good temporarily, and like I was in control temporarily. I was a compulsive runner on and off, but mostly on, for 15 years. The other self-destructive behavior or coping mechanism I picked up when I was 15 was laxative abuse, which I abused for a few years in my teens and then again a little later in my 20s. The laxatives were just a way for me to think I had control over my weight and the food I was consuming, but I really didn't. But it made me feel like I had control over those things, even though it was destructive to my body. I kept picking up these coping mechanisms or self-destructive behaviors, and I was wondering myself why, and I couldn't stop. I thought something might have happened to made me do this, and so I would go to my mom for support and say, what happened? Like, why am I struggling in life? I asked her if anything happened in childhood. I asked her, why am I this way? Why am I doing these things? And she always told me that nothing happened in the past and that it was my fault or that something was wrong with me. It was so gaslighting, so brainwashing, and she scapegoated me. My whole family did. They took the self-destructive coping mechanisms that I picked up as a result of my painful childhood and used it against me and said there was something wrong with me. Sometimes my mom would even tell me that she thinks she dropped me on the ground when I was a baby and I hit my head, and that was the reason why I was doing all these coping mechanisms and self-destructive behaviors that my true self would never do, and during this entire time I was in so much pain because people were telling me it was my fault. It felt good to get that out. I was so gaslit and scapegoated all the time. So in a nutshell, guys, during these years of denial, I basically started to believe the lies that my mom and others were telling me about reality, and I even started to love my mom, or at least think I loved my mom. The only thing I can say about that is I think I just wanted to love a mom, like, don't we all? And so eventually, after enough years, I was able to repress the childhood and have this relationship with my mom where I thought I loved her. And that inauthentic love I had for my mom started in my teenage years and then when I started getting recovery, I, remembered the truth and things changed. At age 16, I picked up another coping mechanism or self-destructive behavior. I started abusing prescription Adderall. Growing up in the rigid lifestyle that I did, I felt stuck, like I was in a cage or something in my teenage years. And the drugs or the substances helped me feel like I wasn't stuck, like I was free and free to be me, because they gave me this fake euphoria. I started to not love myself. That love I had for myself as a child was not gone, it was lost. And I was using these self-destructive behaviors or drugs and such to help me stay in denial, to protect myself from something that was too painful for me to face at the time. Well, we only have 17 more years to go. Hopefully, I was able to articulate and illustrate a little about how I fell into denial. It's a long story to express and convey, but I did my best at telling you. I'll tell you about ages 17 to 30 in a small nutshell. During those years, I continued to think that there was something wrong with me and that I was the problem. And I also thought I loved my mom. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. It was very painful for me to do these self-destructive behaviors that were addictions, and I couldn't stop. And when I'd ask for support about it, I was told it was me. I was the problem, that there was something wrong with me and that I caused it. And I'm very grateful that I chose a path of self-destruction as a result of my trauma versus a path of hurting other people like my mother. From 17 to 18, I picked up a new coping mechanism, alcohol. I became a partier. I got biggest partier for the high school senior superlative. My grades suffered because of everything I was going through, and I barely graduated. I didn't have enough credits, and so my mom, bought this workbook or something that they sent me in the mail. I filled it out, and then I got my remaining credits in order to graduate high school. I didn't go to my high school graduation because I didn't feel worthy of it. From 17 to 18, I was doing the extreme dieting, I was abusing laxatives, Adderall, alcohol, I was a compulsive runner, I was partying a lot, and I was chewing up food and spitting it out when nobody was around. I was a mess, and I didn't know why. My mom didn't want me to do well or succeed, and she enabled me not to do well, particularly with my education. When I was struggling in school because of all this going on, I needed a mother to help me, to help me with my education, something that's so valuable, and to be my biggest cheerleader and support me and help me get from high school to go to college, and I didn't receive that. Instead, I was enabled to do not well. And that's another story, but just saying. My sisters were encouraged to go to college and were supported by my mom. Not me. About a year after high school, so when I was 19, I started dating somebody. I stopped doing the Adderall, and we dated for about 3 years. During those 3 years, even though I stopped using the Adderall, I was still having issues with trying to control my food, going on diets, and very conscious about my weight, fearful of being overweight. My weight fluctuated a lot, and also I was doing a lot of chewing up food and spitting it out while no one was watching. Honestly, guys, I did that a lot. I spent a lot of time in my precious life chewing up food and spitting it out. God did not create me like this. God didn't create me to do these self-destructive behaviors. Chew up food and spit it out. The Adderall, the laxatives, all the running. My Creator didn't create me like that. Pain travels from generation to generation until somebody is ready to face it and feel it, which is what I'm doing. How people respond to their pain, their trauma, is individualized. This is how I responded with self-destruction. And I'm grateful I hurt myself rather than others like my mom. Let's get into the ages of 21 to 23. So I started working at a nightclub where I made a lot of money. And I started working there because I wanted to pay for a private college I wanted to go to. I ended up not going to that college because my self-destruction got in the way. I also didn't have parents that were supporting me and encouraging me. My mom would pretend to support me, but she really wasn't. Anyway, so I'm at this club, and I had the intentions of going to the college, but what ended up happening is about 4 or 5 months in, I'm not exactly sure how long, but somebody there was talking about Percocet and how they liked it, and I didn't know what it was, and they were like, here's 2 of them, take them sometime, and I'm like, okay. So I took them home, I put them, in a candle, and a month later, I'm like, I'm going to take these. I was off of work that day. And from that moment on, for age is 21, 22, 23, and a little of 24, I was addicted to opiates. And that addiction was ugly. That addiction took a lot of money, almost all of the money that I made from working at that club. My true self would never be an opiate addict. I was confused once again. But I also kept telling myself, I'll just worry about this later, because the opiates helped me shove my feelings down, my memories, and it just progressed me more and more into denial, and that's all I could handle at the time. Maybe the opiates and all my other self-destructive behaviors protected me from the truth, because maybe I wasn't strong enough to face it at that time. I don't know. During ages 21 to 23, when I was working at the club, my main coping mechanisms were the opiate and alcohol addiction, and then the chewing and the spitting when no one was watching. That was my little secret, because if that was my secret, then I could forget about the secret with Sam, and then I could forget about the rest of my childhood. If I just kept my chewing and spitting food thing a secret, I could be shameful about that and forget about what I was really shameful about and really keeping a secret, if that makes any sense. At 23, I hit a rock bottom. I was spending all my money from the club on gambling, slot machines, and especially the opiates that I was buying, and I was a mess, and I couldn't understand why. Once again, I felt trapped. I felt awful. I felt like I wanted to leave, and I was hitting a rock bottom. Things weren't going good. I just wanted to be me, but didn't know how. I wanted help. Also, I couldn't remember childhood at all from age 0 to 9, and nobody in my family could give me answers. So when I was 23, I was looking up rehabs, and I saw a bunch far away, and I thought I'd find one nearby, but a lot were in great locations, Florida, California, etc. And I never thought of that, and I'm something inside of me was go away, and I was I'm going to go to rehab in Florida. So I went to rehab in Florida when I was 23 for my drug addiction, and I thought I was only going to be there for 30 days like the program said or whatever, and that I would be cured and come home and live happily ever after. But I never moved home after those 30 days. I never moved back. And I'm so grateful I physically left the area when I was 23, because I strongly believe that helped me find the truth later when I was 30 and recover. I only lasted in Florida for about 4 or 5 months, and then I moved to the West Coast. Florida didn't go so well for me. Things got worse before they got better. I stayed in rehab in Florida for 60-ish days, but afterwards I moved there, I stayed there, and I made friends with other relapsers. And I relapsed. Things got really bad really quickly. Before I knew it, I lost everything. I was living out of my car, and a drug dealer stole my car. A few people gave me an intervention on Atlantic Avenue in Delray Beach, and they advised me to go to the West Coast to try different rehabs. Basically strangers. They were nice to me, and I trusted them, and so I went to the West Coast for rehab. And remember, I lost everything. The only thing I had was the outfit I was wearing because I was living out of my car. My younger sister sent me some clothes, and I went to the West Coast with just a box of clothes and my purse and phone and wallet. And I had no money. Health insurance was paying for all of these rehabs, which was a miracle. And by the way, I'm very grateful my younger sister gave me those clothes, because then I had clothes to wear to the rehab in California. I don't know what I would have done without that box of clothes. It took me a few rehabs and a few months to get sober on the West Coast, but I finally did on February 13th of 2013. And today, 11 years later, I do get to enjoy a glass of wine every once in a while socially, because I'm not addicted anymore. I can just have a glass of wine. And I'll talk about that more next episode. Getting sober didn't help my emotional pain. Things just got worse because I got sober and I was still in so much pain, and then therefore, more confused. I also did my second personality switch at age 24, and without getting into my dissociative identity disorder journey, what that basically means is I became more distant from my true self, more disconnected from my true self, more disassociated from my true self. I knew I forgot age 0 to 9. I would even tell people that I forgot age 0 to 9, but I didn't think it was a problem or the problem. And I did have clues too when I was in denial, and that's a whole nother story. But sleep disturbances, many. One reoccurring dream that I remember really well, night sweats. I still get night sweats. I don't get the dreams anymore, thankfully. Triggers, so many triggers I just couldn't explain, and it made me so mad because I couldn't figure out why. For example, progressive rock music, gum chewing. Today I know why I had those triggers. Some of them are still my triggers, some are not. For example, I do like progressive rock music today, but during my years of denial, when I heard it, it just brought me back to the past because the parents would play progressive rock. My mom particularly liked King Crimson, even during rituals sometimes. So, yeah, long story short, I had clues. I wasn't ready to face them. 24 to 29 were the sickest years in my denial. I was so disconnected from myself. I was addicted to anything that could give me the next fix, but without using drugs or alcohol. It was awful. I had a lot of dental problems during my 20s, probably because of all the food I chewed and spit. And when I was 27, 28, I got a whole bunch of dental work done. A lot of my teeth are crowned, and it was so shameful for me. It just added to the shame because now, so much of my mouth had been worked on, and I just felt like it was my fault, and it added to the shame. And I can't believe I'm sharing about it today, but that's okay because it will help me heal and rid the shame. My relationship with my family in my 20s was weird. I would tell myself that I loved them, and I kept telling myself that they were awesome, and I put them on a pedestal, and I would say I was the mess up of the family. I started to believe the lies that they had been telling me my whole life, that I was crazy, that something was wrong with me. And I walked around life believing that, spending my precious time believing that lie, their lie. But I was the strong one in the family. I was fighting for what was right as a child, and my family pushed my existence down because of that, because I fought for what was right. Unless anyone here thinks sacrificing kids and eating flesh is right. It's just not. It's not, and that's why I'm fighting and won't stop. My younger sister is the only one in my family who, up until maybe recently lately, because our relationship is not really existent anymore, especially since speaking out, but she was the kindest to me. She was kind. When I was going through these self-destructive behaviors, if she judged me, she didn't judge me harshly to my face. She was kind. By age 29, I felt like a robot. I didn't feel like Kibbi. I felt so distant from my true self, and mentally, I felt like I was preparing to get help. I was gaining the courage to get help because I knew I would have to get honest about my chewing and spitting to get help. So I remember at age 29, I was considering it, and at age 30, I did. I say I felt like a robot because I wasn't having any of my feelings because of all these other coping mechanisms. And I was so confused about reality from all the gaslighting that I didn't feel like me. Everyone deals with trauma differently. My sisters did not take an extreme path of self-destruction like me. I don't know how they dealt with their trauma. I could guess, but I don't know for sure, and it's not my story to tell. Then at age 30, I started recovery and started getting help. I'm going to talk about that next episode, my recovery around all of this. So there is hope. There's always hope. In recovery, I started slowly having my feelings again, something I loved as a child, and they went away when I was in denial. And today, I no longer chew up and spit out food, have compulsive eating, go on extreme diets. I don't need to. All of that went away when I embraced my trauma and my true self. I learned that my responses to my trauma or the self-destructive behavior wasn't really me, and that I wasn't the problem. It was just my reaction, my response to the trauma. I also learned that the chewing and spitting behavior was influenced by my childhood, and that I wasn't crazy for doing such a unique behavior. My past in denial does not define me. Today, I love myself rather than hurt myself on a daily basis. And I look forward to telling you about my recovery around this. In my experience, there's always beauty on the other side of pain. There's always hope. Recovery is always possible. So how did I fall into denial? Okay. My mom brainwashed me and gaslit me into thinking that the rituals never happened. My mom also used many manipulation tactics on me to confuse me into denial. And I had coping mechanisms that were self-destructive, and in return, they repressed my feelings and my memories. My mom and others in my family pointed the finger at me and said that I was the problem, and eventually I believed it. I am the scapegoat of the family. They scapegoated me, except for my younger sister. I'm not going to say she never scapegoated me, but for the most part, she was very kind towards me during all of these years. Today, my younger sister is unfortunately deeply in denial, but she is the only person from my family I've ever had true love for. I believe at this point, and I don't know because I haven't been talking to her, but now we're in our 30s. I'm 36. She's 35. I'm speaking out about this issue, and it saddens me to know that today she might think I'm crazy and mentally ill like the rest of my family. I don't know. So glad I got that out and off of my chest today. I truly believe that it will help me heal, especially the shame, as I talk about it, and that's my experience too. Thank you for listening. I love healing, and I love you all. That concludes today's episode, friends. My journey with denial. Thanks for listening to She Got Away, your podcast that shines light on the depths of darkness. I'm your host, Kibbi Linga. Join us 2 Mondays from now for episode 7, where I'll be talking about the good stuff, my recovery around all of this. When I was a child, I dreamt of sharing my story and telling on my mom. It took me some years to get here due to my years in denial, but I'm here, and I appreciate you being here. Until next time, bye.
She got away, she got away, oh, she got away, oh, she got away.